Hi everybody, thanks so much for checking out my channel, and thanks so very much for checking out this video. Why are we here? Is there even a reason? Is the universe just a brute fact with some randomness thrown in? Or is our existence part of some coordinated collective tapestry? Are we just flecks of debris floating on a chaotic current? Or is the cosmos, in all of its overwhelming scope and scale, part of an equation? And if it is, what's on the other side of the equal sign? What's really strange is that this is the biggest question we can even ask, but we almost never talk about it. It creeps up in our existential anxieties, but we almost always choose to set it aside rather than tackle it head on. Well, I know that this is a hard question to answer, but in this video, I'm going to try to answer the biggest question in the universe and set aside the poetry and vibes, and instead embrace some recent insights from the sciences. If you didn't already know this, I was an atheist for almost all of my adult life. In fact, I was diagnosed with a terminal malignancy years ago, and that didn't even shake my atheism. There's a saying that there are no atheists in foxholes, but there's no foxhole conversion in this story. But as an atheist, I always attacked the straw man of this argument, which is whether or not there's a God. But gradually, I realized that's not the biggest question we can ask. I realized that there's a question that looms even larger. Instead of asking whether there is an anthropomorphic, magical sky daddy orchestrating reality, I started asking a question about the cosmos that's really more broad. If you're stuck on the question, is there a God? I would suggest that you do the same thing that I did. Change your focus and ask whether there is a purpose to the universe. Now that shift changed everything for me. And here's a thought experiment that I think explains why. Imagine someone you completely trust sends you an email tomorrow that says, there is a God, nothing else. Would life change? If you think you've been a moral person, probably not. You wouldn't know what God wants, you wouldn't know if you've been doing the right things, and you'd be left with really all the same questions that you started with. Why are we here? Is there a purpose? What should we be doing? Those are the actual questions. God, broadly defined, is one possible answer to them. But in this video, we're going to start by asking the question, rather than jumping forward to a specific answer. Now don't worry, we're going to lay out some definitions, but first, if you get something out of this video, please click the like button, please subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon for notifications, and leave a comment. This video isn't me foisting my opinion on you, it's, I hope, the start of a conversation. By the way, I've written some complete books on this topic, and I may put some of the relevant links in the video description, so if they're there, please check them out. I also want to tell you up front that this video ends on a thought experiment about artificial superintelligence that I think really gets to the heart of the matter. It's a paradox, but I think it shines a light on everything that we'll be talking about in this video. So please do stick around for the end. Now, the word purpose is broad, and it can be problematic. So the first thing we're going to do is define what purpose means. I've adapted 5 different possible definitions of a purposeful universe. And by the way, none of these definitions necessarily invoke theology. So this isn't an apologist video, it's about something bigger. Let's look at these 5 definitions. They're not perfect, but I think they get us a little closer to an understanding of what purpose the universe might hold. The first definition is a teleological universe, from the Greek word teleos, which means end or goal. A teleological universe is one that's directed toward a specific end. There's something that the universe is heading towards, some final state, some completion, or some destination written into the structure of reality. Think of a seed that contains within it the form of the tree that it will become someday. A teleological universe is just like that. It's going somewhere specific. The second definition is meaningfulness. A meaningful universe has some sort of significance or value, so things matter. Not just instrumentally in the sense that they matter to creatures like us who happen to care, but in some more fundamental sense. A meaningful universe is one where the value isn't projected onto reality by observers. It's already there in the fabric. The third definition is specific structure. A structured universe has non-arbitrary features, like information that wouldn't exist in a purely contingent arrangement. The universe does seem to have specific rules and specific universal and scientific constants. It has a directional history from simplicity toward complexity. None of that is a forced feature or an outcome of any kind of logical necessity. The cosmos definitely could have been otherwise. The fourth definition is design. Now, I want to tread carefully here because the word design has been thrown around in some bizarre and some flawed ways. But this doesn't have to be non-scientific. If you believe in simulation theory, for example, then you already believe that the universe is designed. So definitionally, a designed universe is just one made by an agent with intentions. So this doesn't have to be traditional theism. The fifth definition is what I'm going to call mind orientation. A mind-oriented universe is biased towards producing minds, not just life, but specifically the kind of complexity that gives rise to consciousness, observation, and understanding. A mind-oriented universe is one where the appearance of observers is built in. So the question is whether it's mere coincidence or brute fact that there are conscious entities in the universe on the inside looking out. Now, these do come apart, so you can accept one without the other. The claim I'm defending encompasses all 5 definitions. It's that the universe's fundamental features cannot be exhaustively explained as brute contingency, that there's something more going on. Now, I hope that you can see that these are more broad understandings than purely theistic definitions. So this isn't yet an argument for God, it's an argument for purposefulness. For me, this was the first step in my journey, so I hope that it's an applicable question to some of you out there. Alright, so now we're switching gears, and we're going to discuss reasons for asserting a purposeful universe. The argument that I find most underappreciated is the preservation of information. So this is a terse skim of a very dense topic, but it's really important, and this is an underappreciated argument. Studying black holes in the early 2000s, physicists were forced into a striking conclusion. Information in the universe seems to be conserved. Now, we figured this out by studying black holes, but the same physics also applies to our universe. Samuel Bronstein and Arun Patti proved in 2007 that even at the quantum level, information cannot be erased. Leonard Susskind named this the -first law of thermodynamics. -first because it's even more fundamental than the 0th law. And it gets misused a little, but the holographic principle, developed by Susskind and Gerard de 't Hooft, holds that the information content of any region of space is encoded on its boundary. So this may sound surprising, but when you do anything at all, that information is preserved. It's preserved on the event horizon of our cosmos. It can become chaotic, complex, and distributed beyond any practical recovery, but it cannot be destroyed. The universe does seem to have a memory. And just like matter and energy can't ever be destroyed, information also can never be truly erased. Everything that we are, everything that we do, becomes the narrative written on the actual topography of the event horizon of our universe. Now that sounds a little like poetry, but it actually is science. One of my favorite quotes from German thinker Johann Wolfgang von Goethe is a deathbed lamentation, realizing in his final moments on his own deathbed that he was dying without ever being known by anyone and without ever knowing anyone. That's a piercing thought, but if information is preserved, no one ever really dies quite in that sense. Everything that you've thought and felt and done is part of the permanent structure of reality. You are known exhaustively by the universe itself. Whether anything beyond the universe can read that record is a separate question, but the fact that that record exists is not. Now, as an atheist, my model had always been the opposite. We live in a vast, dark, uncaring universe where information gets swallowed up by entropy and our actions ultimately don't really matter. Atheist Rebecca Goldstein argues that God can't exist because the universe is too chaotic to track what happens within it. Now, even if that argument is appealing, Goldstein is frankly wrong about the physics. The universe does keep a record. Information conservation means that everything that happens is, in principle, knowable. If anything outside the universe is capable of reading that information, it could theoretically know everything about each and every one of us. Now, a brute fact universe has really no reason to preserve information. When I encountered these revelations from physics, my atheist worldview started to come apart a little bit. The universe wasn't a forgetful void. It was a recording medium. That might not prove purposefulness, but it at least points in a direction. Now, all of us will eventually be forgotten. We'll be forgotten by our friends and our family, and eventually anyone who ever knew us. But you won't be forgotten by the universe. Now, the second reason is that the universe also seems to run in a specific direction. Everywhere you look in reality, there are hierarchies all around us. Quarks give rise to atoms, atoms to molecules, molecules to chemistry, chemistry to biology, biology to consciousness, and each step is improbable, but each step is also necessary for the next. Now, the materialistic answer is that this is just what happens. Given enough time in a fine-tuned universe, complexity emerges, and there's no deeper meaning than that. But notice what this admits. Even in the naturalist argument, complexity all the way up to consciousness is built into the structure of the universe. Now, I agree that because of the naturalistic laws of our universe, that cognition is favored by selection, and Simon Conway Morris at Cambridge University showed that things like consciousness may be like recurring motifs that arise inevitably whenever life takes hold. So this results in an inevitable outcome. The universe produces minds whenever complexity allows, and those minds become lenses for the universe to view itself. So the cosmos produces conscious entities that then look back and perceive the cosmos in a reciprocal manner. So the universe is the only thing we know of that wakes up inside of itself and actually takes a look around. Now, the third reason, which I find compelling, is the mathematics. Physicist Eugene Wigner wrote a famous paper in 1960 called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences. The puzzle Wigner pointed out is this: mathematics, which is an abstract human pursuit, maps onto physical reality with extraordinary precision. Equations developed for purely theoretical reasons turn out to describe how the world actually works. Now, the strongest cases for this are predictive. Paul Dirac's equations in 1928 implied the existence of antimatter before anyone had observed it. Antimatter was then later discovered in 1932, confirming that prediction. James Clerk Maxwell's equations in the 1860s predicted electromagnetic waves traveling at the speed of light. And then later, Heinrich Hertz confirmed that prediction in 1887. In both cases, the mathematics generated predictions about reality. It wasn't describing what we already saw. It was telling us what we hadn't yet looked for. If the universe were genuinely brute fact, this would be hard to explain. Why would abstract structures developed by humans correspond so precisely to the underlying structure of reality? Why would the universe be intelligible to creatures who evolved on a savanna? Now, you can argue that the mathematics is just our pattern recognition formalized, and that the universe seems mathematical because we're projecting mathematical description onto it. But projection doesn't explain prediction. If maths were only a description, it wouldn't successfully tell us about things we haven't yet observed. Some scientists across disciplines now think that the universe has a deeply mathematical substructure. So the mathematics is fundamental, and existence emerges the way a computer code executes a program. Now that substructure is intelligible to minds, but Wigner argues that the fit between formalism and reality is too precise and too predictive to be just coincidence. The universe is downstream of intelligibility itself, not just matter that happens to be mathematical, but matter structured by something more fundamental. A coding language must exist underneath. If existence were brute fact, you wouldn't expect it to have a substructure that calls for explanation, but it does, and mathematics is that fundamental substructure. Now, the last argument is parsimony. Our universe has features that are deeply unlikely under brute contingency. The fundamental constants are calibrated within extraordinarily narrow ranges that permit chemistry, stars, planets, and life. The cosmological constant alone is fixed to a precision that if it was varied by 1 part in 10 to the 120, the universe could not have formed structure. Picture a row of dials, each one set to a precise value, all oriented in exactly the direction needed for a universe like ours to exist. You would need something many times more powerful than a scanning electron microscope to tune those knobs to the precision that we observe. And there's never been any credible analysis suggesting the constants should be tightly constrained by any underlying necessity. Now, other than constrainments which really only come about from wild conjecture, the only materialistic answer to this is the multiverse. Now, this holds that there are infinite universes with all possible values of these constants, and we happen to just be in one of the exceedingly rare universes where the constants permit observers. So that's the only reason why our universe looks fine-tuned. But notice what this answer costs. To explain why one universe has these features, you have to posit an infinite ensemble of universes you can't observe and have no independent evidence for. So you're trading in one strange universe for a near infinity of unseen ones invoked specifically to explain away the strangeness of the first. The simpler explanation is that the universe is the way it is because it has a reason to be that way, not just blind chance in an infinite multiverse. The universe exists because it's supposed to exist. There's also an internal problem with the multiverse. According to Roger Penrose, if you're a random observer in an infinite ensemble, the math says that you should be a Boltzmann brain, a brief flicker of consciousness in chaos, not a full person looking at billions of orderly galaxies. The fact that you're not a flicker is itself a problem for the multiverse. It predicts observers that don't look anything like us. Now, I'm not claiming that any of these arguments are proof, but I am claiming that purpose is the most parsimonious explanation among all of the available options. All right, here's one more empirical observation. There may be some experiential evidence that there's a higher purpose in the universe. Reliably, people who are atheists or agnostics and have near-death experiences return from those experiences with a robust, compelling, and enduring sense that there is some higher power beyond our material existence. Now, I made a whole video about this, so I won't go into this at length here, but it's worth at least a brief reminder. A lot of the pseudoscience and vibey claims around near-death experiences have indeed been debunked. But there is a core claim that remains even in rigorous studies, that people who have near-death experiences come back more convinced that there's more to reality than what we experience and perceive materially in this life. So near-death experiences do turn atheists into people who believe in something, and the reverse experience doesn't exist. So the traffic only exists in one direction. Now, we've meandered through some really esoteric topics, but there's a sentence that's popped up in a few of our videos. You are loved, and you have a purpose. Maybe the purpose of the universe is intertwined with love. Maybe that's something that bridges our purpose and the purpose of our cosmos. That's something that transcends the science that we've discussed, but maybe it's just as important. Now on to the thought experiment that I promised at the beginning of this video. Let's say that an impartial external observer is watching humanity. And while they're watching, we humans have just successfully created an artificial superintelligence. The superintelligence is dramatically wiser and more capable of moral reasoning than any level that we could match. Now, the external observer has a switch. Flipping it cedes all control of human civilization to the superintelligence permanently. Humans would no longer make any meaningful decisions about how human civilization is run. Should the observer flip the switch? Well, the materialist case is pretty straightforward. If morality is something we work out by thinking, and more thinking produces better moral conclusions, then a superior intelligence should make better moral decisions than we do. We trust better physicists to tell us about physics. We should trust a better moral reasoner to tell us about morality. So the answer would be flip the switch. Now, I've ran this experiment past some friends, and so far, no one would actually flip the switch. But when I've engaged rigid materialists, it's really hard for them to come up with a rationalization that doesn't counter their worldview. So what's the reason not to flip the switch? Try to make the case for humanity on purely materialistic grounds. I'm willing to guess that every grounding that you can come up with would destabilize under scrutiny. Now, I'm not saying that we should flip the switch. So far, almost everyone I've talked to has said that we shouldn't, but they can't quite put their finger on the reason. Something seems to transcend reasoning that suggests a rationalization that's beyond pure materialism. There seems to be a vague intuition that humanity has some value that we can't quite ground in purely scientific reasoning. If you can't find a strictly material reason not to flip the switch, that's worth sitting with. Maybe your intuition is tracking something the materialistic framework doesn't have room for. Maybe humanity is more than the sum of computations in our skulls. Maybe the universe really is more than brute matter underneath. Those are some questions that I hope you sit with, and I'd love to know what your answers are. Now, if you get something out of this video, please click the like button, please subscribe, please click the bell icon for notifications. And now you know what I think, but I really want to know more about what you think. Do you think the universe has a purpose? Do you think that we do? Let me know in the comment section. And above all else, make sure that you all please have a really wonderful day.